During the Australian Grand Prix weekend, something unusual happened in the garage of Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. It involved one of the most talked-about rookies in Formula One right now, Kimi Antonelli. At first, it looked like a small and almost harmless mistake during a busy session. But within minutes, the situation escalated when the FIA suddenly opened not one but two investigations into what had just happened. For many fans watching the session, the moment seemed confusing. Why would such a routine garage incident trigger a double investigation from the sport's governing body? And what exactly had Mercedes done wrong? To understand the story, we need to go back to the moment Antonelli left the garage during the session at the Australian Grand Prix. The Albert Park weekend had already been intense, with teams pushing hard to gather data and prepare their setups. In these moments, garages become extremely busy environments. Mechanics are rushing to adjust components, engineers are communicating with drivers over the radio, and the clock is always ticking. Every second matters when cars are preparing to leave the pit lane. When Antonelli's Mercedes was released from the garage, everything initially appeared normal. The car rolled forward and headed toward the pit lane exit, but very quickly, something strange happened. Equipment that had been attached to the car during preparation was still connected when the car began moving. Instead of being removed before release, the device remained attached and was dragged briefly before detaching. At first glance, it may have seemed like a minor oversight. In a fast-paced garage environment, small mistakes can happen. However, Formula One operates under extremely strict safety regulations. Anything that could create debris on the track or interfere with a car's operation is taken very seriously by race control. The moment that equipment detached and fell away from the car, officials began reviewing the incident, and that's when the situation escalated. Instead of simply noting the mistake and moving on, the FIA opened two separate investigations into the event. This surprised many observers because incidents involving garage equipment typically lead to a single review or a warning. But in this case, officials wanted to understand exactly what had happened and whether multiple rules had been breached. So why did the FIA decide to investigate twice? The first investigation focused on what is known in Formula One as an unsafe release. When a car leaves the garage or pit lane, the team must ensure that the vehicle is completely ready to operate safely on track. This includes removing all tools, cooling devices, and other equipment used during preparation. If a car is released with something still attached, it can create hazards not only for that driver, but also for other competitors. The second investigation looked specifically at the presence of equipment still connected to the car when it entered the pit lane. Devices used to cool the power unit or other components are designed to be removed before the car moves. If those devices remain attached while the car is in motion, they can detach and fall onto the track surface, potentially creating debris. And debris on a Formula One circuit is never taken lightly. Even a small object can become dangerous at racing speeds. Tires running over debris can puncture, and drivers may need to react suddenly to avoid objects on the racing line. Because of this, the FIA maintains strict procedures to prevent anything from being left on track. When officials reviewed the footage of Antonelli's car leaving the garage, they noticed that the equipment had indeed remained attached for a brief moment before falling away. This triggered the investigations. Now here's where the story becomes more interesting. The FIA did not immediately assume wrongdoing or assign blame. Instead, race stewards carefully examined video footage, team communications, and timing data to understand the sequence of events. They wanted to determine whether the mistake was simply a procedural error or something more serious. In Formula One, teams operate under immense pressure during sessions. Mechanics must prepare the car quickly while ensuring every detail is correct. At the same time, engineers are monitoring performance data and adjusting the car's setup based on driver feedback. With so many moving parts, mistakes can occasionally happen. But the FIA must still enforce the rules consistently. After reviewing the incident, stewards concluded that the equipment remaining attached to the car was indeed a mistake made by the team rather than the driver. Antonelli himself had no control over the situation once he left the garage. Drivers rely entirely on their mechanics to confirm that the car is ready to go. As a result, the focus of the investigation shifted toward the team's procedures rather than the driver's actions. Mercedes explained that the device involved was part of the cooling equipment used to manage temperatures while the car is stationary in the garage. These cooling devices help prevent overheating of sensitive components such as the power unit and electronics. When the car is ready to leave, mechanics must disconnect them quickly before releasing the vehicle. In this case, the removal process did not happen exactly as intended. The stewards ultimately determined that Mercedes had committed a procedural error by allowing the car to leave the garage with equipment still attached. However, because the device detached almost immediately and did not create a significant hazard on track, the situation was considered manageable. Instead of imposing a severe sporting penalty on the driver, the FIA decided to issue a financial penalty to the team. Mercedes received a fine for the incident, acknowledging that the mistake was related to their garage procedures rather than any action by Antonelli. Importantly, Antonelli himself was allowed to continue participating in the session without a grid penalty. For the rookie driver, that decision was crucial. Antonelli has been under intense scrutiny since entering Formula One. Young drivers often face enormous pressure to perform immediately while adapting to the complexity of the sport. Incidents involving penalties or investigations can sometimes overshadow their performance. In this case, the FIA made it clear that the driver was not responsible for what had happened. But the story also highlights just how precise and disciplined Formula One teams must be during race weekends. Garage operations are highly choreographed. Every mechanic has a specific role, and every action is timed carefully to ensure the car can return to the track as quickly as possible. From tyre changes to aerodynamic adjustments, the entire process must run like a perfectly synchronized system. When even a small detail is missed, the consequences can quickly become visible. The Antonelli incident serves as a reminder of how complex Formula One operations really are. Fans often focus on what happens on track, the overtakes, the lap times, the strategy decisions, but behind the scenes, dozens of team members are working constantly to ensure everything functions correctly. A single missed step can lead to an investigation from the FIA. At the same time, the situation also demonstrates how the governing body approaches incidents with careful analysis. Rather than immediately assigning blame or issuing harsh penalties, stewards evaluate the full context before reaching a decision. In this case, the outcome was relatively straightforward. Mercedes accepted responsibility for the procedural error and paid the fine. Antonelli was cleared to continue his weekend without additional consequences. But the incident still generated discussion among fans and analysts. Some observers argued that the FIA was right to enforce the rules strictly, even for what might appear to be a minor mistake. Others felt that the situation could have been handled with a warning rather than a formal investigation. These debates are common in Formula One, where the interpretation of regulations often becomes part of the broader narrative of a race weekend. For Antonelli, the most important outcome was that the investigation did not disrupt his participation in the event. As a young driver building his career, maintaining momentum during race weekends is extremely important. Meanwhile, Mercedes will likely review its internal procedures to ensure that similar mistakes do not happen again. Teams constantly refine their operations to eliminate risks and improve efficiency. Even experienced teams occasionally encounter unexpected situations that require adjustments. And that's part of what makes Formula One so fascinating. Every race weekend is not just a competition between drivers on track, but also a test of operational excellence behind the scenes. The Antonelli investigation may not have changed the result of the session, but it offered an interesting glimpse into the precision required at the highest level of motorsport. Now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think the FIA handled this situation correctly by issuing a fine to Mercedes rather than penalizing the driver? Or should teams face stricter consequences when equipment leaves the garage still attached to the car? Let me know what you think in the comments, because these kinds of incidents often spark some of the most interesting debates in Formula One.